your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
Thank you, sir. May I have another?
Hey, good evening, horror fans. Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here as always with my partner, Matt. And Matt, this week we wanted to have a little celebration. We talked about last week, we hit 50 published episodes, which is kind of a cool milestone. And we like to, for whatever reason, we like to mark milestones by doing a cool list. And I always think lists are interesting because they create debate and everybody has their opinions. And I just really enjoy that breaking stuff down and having differing opinions on things. So this week we're going to do the greatest horror franchises of all time. What do you think of this? I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's tough. It's fun to do. But like you said, like they always change. Like I feel like sometimes you could ask me like on Monday what I think my list would be, and by Friday I might have a different idea. But similar, like with similar reason. So it's always fun to kind of like step back and try to create a list with these and see like you kind of look at them differently, and you kind of have more of a analytical eye when you're watching them when you're trying to make up this type of list. So it's kind of fun to do.
Yeah, we kind of our ground rules that we kind of put in place was it had to have at least 3 entries to be considered a franchise, and then beyond that it was just cultural impact, volume, recognition, and certainly quality of the movies plays a role. And I think it's a pretty cool list. And I know I have a list of like also rans that were in consideration that didn't quite make the cut. I imagine you do as well.
Yeah, I have a bunch that were in consideration. There were ones that I was thinking about, but they just didn't make the cut.
Yeah, and we did our top 20 here. So I'll just real quickly the 3 of mine that I had that didn't quite make the cut, but probably would have been in the next batch were the Final Destination franchise, the Hammer Dracula series, and the Predator series.
Yeah, I had the Final Destination, I had Predator, I had Jaws, and I also had Blade in there. But I kind of saw Blade and Predator as more of action oriented. I mean, but you could certainly you could really make the argument that they could be in this list.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, Jaws I did consider. But yeah, it's tough to narrow down. But we'll start going through our list. And again, as always, we welcome your feedback. We like it when you say, hey, you got this wrong. I completely disagree, or you got it right. We love to hear those kind of comments and feedback. But I'll start with for number 20 is the Insidious franchise. And this franchise began in 2010. It's brought us 5 films to date, including a 2023 release, Insidious: The Red Door, which is one of the weaker entries in the series. And it's kind of, as with many franchises, the original is by far the best. The second's pretty good. You kind of need that strong start and then a good follow-up, and then you kind of got a series that's kind of the standard format. But the series has made a ton of money, and it's brimming with talent involved. James Wan, whose name we're going to hear a lot in this list, and Lee Winnell were the creators. And you had Patrick Wilson, Rose Byrne, Barbara Hershey, Dermot Mulroney, some really quality participants through the whole series. I don't consider it a superstar series. It's not the first thing that comes to my mind, but it's made enough of a cultural and industry impact to be number 20 on our list.
Yeah, I love the paranormal horror genre. These movies have great imagery and they have great atmosphere. They're really good at building tension in these movies, and some of them sometimes they utilize a lot of the jump scares, but a lot of times they just kind of go for like the creep out factor, and I think it's done really well.
Great, excellent.
Number 19 is Paranormal Activity franchise. It was originally appeared in 2007 and then releasing to wide audiences in 2009, directed by Oren Peli. It grossed $193 million on a $15,000 budget. And the series went on to make a total of 7 films with various directors. And I'm like I said, I'm a sucker for the unknown paranormal. And what I love about these films is that they use the home footage style mixed with less is more, and they don't utilize a lot of CGI. And I genuinely appreciate that in a horror film when they use the camera angles effectively.
Yeah, no, it's a very impactful series, and I think it's infamous for being, like you said, that small budget hit. And if you made a historical list of, the biggest successes of the under $50,000 movies, there's a handful that really kicked off, and this is probably the most famous one. And I think it's a series that it makes the very most out of building anticipation. And I noticed through watching some of these movies, sometimes the anticipation doesn't even pay off. There isn't even a payoff at the end, but it's got you on the edge of your seat, wondering what's going to happen. They do a great job with that.
Yeah, they did a wonderful job at that. And that's one thing, like you said, sometimes there isn't a payoff. So that kind of keeps you on your seat. Like, wait, when is this payoff coming? And it just comes later.
Yeah. Good choice. For number 18, I have the Art the Clown, the Terrifier series. And Art the Clown has been terrorizing viewers since 2008 in short films, but really kind of created his path with All Hallows Eve in 2013, which spawned Terrifier in 2016, and another small budget, huge success in Terrifier 2 last year in 2022. And there is an upcoming Terrifier 3. Art the Clown has become iconic by refusing to adhere to kind of the industry norms and trends, and he unapologetically slashes and gores his way through in really old school horror movie fashion. He's gory, he's gruesome, he's nasty, and the hyper successful Terrifier 2, when we covered this film, to me, and I'll say it again, contains the longest and most drawn out vicious kill I can remember.
Yeah.
It's a franchise that plays by its own rules, and staying outside of the Hollywood framework allows them to do that. And it looks like it's going to continue to grow and expand as arts really took off.
Yeah, I like what you said about playing by its own rules. It kind of does that. There's, I think it's in Terrifier 2 where he uses a gun, right? He's like, I can just use a pistol. Like, whereas you wouldn't normally see that with like Freddy or Jason or Michael Myers. Like he just utilizes anything, and he's just an absolute menace. And I love Art the Clown. I think it's a great new age icon. I think we need a new one. And I think it's going to be real fun to see him in movies coming up in the years. All right, number 17, we have Hellraiser. The original was released in 1987, directed by Clive Barker, who wrote the book Hellbound Heart. That was the source for the movie, and introducing the Cenobites that can't differentiate between pain and pleasure, and diving into the paranormal, hellish S&M of horror. There have since been 11 movies in the franchise, with a lot of flops, but for creativity and lore itself, I think it's one of the best franchises ever conceived. And I actually honestly think that Pinhead was one of the most undervalued horror icons of all time. I think they could have done a lot more with him. But there were a lot of movies, but I think they could have taken it in slightly different directions sometimes. But some of those originals are some of my favorite horror movies of all time.
Yeah, I totally agree. Iconic series with an awesome origin movie, and I actually really love too.
Yes,
the scene with the mentally insane guy and the razor blade on the mattress is just out of this world. And then later on, where they actually create a Cenobite, it's just terrific stuff. And yeah, the quality declined as the series went on, but yeah, Pinhead is a classic, readily recognizable horror star, and he would be, up for debate on the Mount Rushmore of horror franchise characters.
yeah, I put him up there.
Okay. Excellent. Moving on to number 16, we have Saw. And this is another James Wan Lee Winnell creation that debuted in 2004 and has seen 10 films all the way up to 2023. And the premise of this vindictive game master who puts people in traps with an attempt to teach them a lesson or rehabilitate them or make a difficult choice has kind of become trope in the horror movie genre, just based on the Saw franchise alone. The series varies in quality, as any series that runs that long typically does. There's even a Chris Rock, entry that feels different than the rest.
Yep.
It does a lot of creative kills over the 10 films. I actually prefer the claustrophobic and uneasiness of the original before you really know everything that you learn to know, before the premise is out of the bag. But the Jigsaw character is another iconic figure, and it's been a hugely successful franchise.
Yeah, I agree. The first few I really enjoyed. I think I saw 2 and 3 in the theaters. I think the first one I just saw on DVD when it came out, but I really liked them a lot. And to me, they kind of diminished because after a while, the narrative kind of got watered down. It's like, well, they're kind of doing this for the same reason. There's some bad people, they deserve to get hurt. It's like, okay, we've kind of seen this, and they're kind of just doing it for like the unique kills. But I've heard that the Saw X is one of the best in the entire series, and so I'm kind of really looking forward to seeing that.
All right, good.
Number 15, we have Scream, originally released in 1996, directed by Wes Craven, who also gave us Nightmare on Elm Street series. This series has 6 installments with a 7th on the way, and an MTV series. Scream parodies the slasher genre while also doing everything right about it. In the light of Evil Dead, most of these movies are high quality. That being said, I still think the first one is the best. But Wes Craven's meta slasher concept, blurring the lines of parody and serious film, I think will forever be iconic.
Yeah, agree. Great series. Wes Craven, if you look at his career, he reinvented horror several times, which is just amazing when you think about some of the franchises he's been associated with. The opening scene in the original, although it's somewhat derivative and steals from other movies, it's so well done and surprised so many people by killing away the biggest name in the movie and the opening scene. And it really created the meta horror that has kind of become a thing now.
I think he even kind of did that, like like Psycho. They kill off the main character halfway through, and since he's parodying all of these slashers, all of these movies over the years, I think he went with that route. It's like, well, I'll just kill this one off in the first scene. Like I'll put her in the trailer on the poster and kill her off in the first scene. I thought that was just genius.
Yeah, when you take the the babysitter trope and the the phone call trope, and it's so much of that opening scene with Drew Barrymore is all stuff you've seen before, but it's done so well that it just takes it to a different level.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, moving on to number 14, Child's Play. Don Mancini and Tom Holland created a franchise based on a killer doll. And it contained the soul of a murderer originating in 1988. It would go on to have 7 movies in the original series, and then a total reboot in 2019 where they substituted AI for the original, which was kind of a voodoo-based, possession transfer type of situation. And there's currently a TV series running. The movies balance horror and comedy and lean hard into their ridiculous premise, particularly in like the Bride of Chucky entries where they're almost satiring themselves. It's not as hugely financially successful as other franchises on the list, but Chucky's iconic. You show that doll to anybody, they know immediately who you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, even middle schoolers nowadays, they see it and they recognize it. It's become one of the most iconic statuses in horror. And the first 3 movies are actually really good. If people aren't familiar with the Child Play movies, like the first 3 are great. Like go watch the first 3. I mean, there's some ups and downs in the series as it goes along, but I mean, those original movies I think were fantastic. They weren't as goofy when they first started off. They kind of got goofy, but like he had like the killer like one-liners like in the second and third one, but like I really like those movies.
Yeah, good series.
Number 13 is Friday the 13th. First released in 1980 as an independent slasher film directed by Sean Cunningham. It ended up making $59 million in the box office on a budget of just $500,000. It's a mostly watchable B movie franchise. Almost all of the movies are B movies in my opinion. But they went on to make 12 films. And I think the character itself created enough iconic status just to kind of bring the whole series to life.
Yeah, absolutely. With 8 of those movies being in the 80s alone, it's kind of the first perpetuator I think of the sequelization of popular movies.
Yeah.
As you said, it's got 10 direct films, crossover with Freddy, a reboot.
Yep.
And it's in video games, it's in comic books. And we talked about this before. I always find it funny that the Jason that everyone recognizes actually doesn't appear until number 3.
Yeah.
But it is unquestionable. We talked about Pinhead and perhaps his role. It's unquestionable that Jason is on the Mount Rushmore of horror icons.
Right, 100%. And like I said, it's kind of like the epitome of like the B movie slasher. Like it was like that. They had, you said 10, and the other two were kind of like linked to it. But I mean, how many other series have been that iconic in the B movie world to set that trend? And I think they did a great job with it. And they're all just fun movies. You could pick any Friday the 13th out of a hat, and most of them you're just gonna laugh and have fun and watch it. Like even like like Jason X. Like it's a lot of these, they're just fun.
Yeah, my favorite is always and will remain the final chapter.
Yeah,
with outstanding Tom Savini effects, with Corey Feldman. It's got a real story. The Tommy Jarvis character gets in Jason's head, and to me that is the peak of the artistic level the franchise achieves. And as you mentioned, it's mostly just B slashers and fun. But I think that movie is really, really good.
Yeah, I think that's the best one.
Okay. Number 12, we have Psycho. And this is a bit of a unique entry that's not the typical franchise like how we normally think of, with Alfred Hitchcock releasing the groundbreaking original back in 1960 and a sequel coming 23 years later in 1983. And then another in 1986, actually directed by star Anthony Perkins, who's a terrific actor who became forever typecast because of his role as Norman Bates. He embodied that creepy weirdness to such a degree, people couldn't see him as anything other than Norman Bates, and his career suffered from it. But the remakes, the sequels, are actually not bad. They're actually pretty well done. They suffer a little bit from being 80s slasher motivated, and they certainly can't reach the level of the original. And there's also a useless shot-by-shot remake, which truly, what is the point? We're gonna replicate every single shot frame for frame. Okay, then what are you bringing to the table here?
Yeah, you're just copy and pasting someone else's paper and turning it in.
Yeah, I don't know what the point of that is, particularly, a movie to this caliber. There's also a very good TV series, Bates Motel, that ties in. 4 is a skip. But basically, the franchise ranking here is bolstered by the quality of the original, a must at the top of any horror list of all time.
Yeah, I actually just recently watched Psycho on Halloween with my girlfriend. She had never seen it. We were talking about, let's watch a classic horror movie, and I was trying to go through stuff, and she had never seen Psycho, and I was like, "You've never seen Psycho?" So we put that on, and she loved it. She doesn't. I mean, she's okay with certain horror movies, but she was like, "That was actually surprisingly good." I was like, "Surprisingly?" I was like, "It's one of the greatest, most classics of all time." And she was like, "Yeah, that's true." But it was. She really enjoyed it. So it's a classic that still holds up.
Very good.
Number 11, we have The Exorcist, released in 1973, directed by William Blatty, who also wrote the book. The franchise went on to release 6 total movies, and there's 2 more in the works. The original is arguably one of the scariest movies of all time. And while some people will disagree with that and say, well, it was just a product of the time, there are scarier movies now. It is the first horror movie to be nominated for Oscar for Best Picture.
Yeah, this is definitely a franchise anchored by the original. Like you said, there's 6 to date and more coming, but the original stands the test of time. And being a horror fan my entire life, I'm asked that question a lot. What's the scariest movie ever made? And it's still my go-to answer, because it's perfect in the world it creates, the acting, the special effects. We talk about special effects from the 80s looking dated. Go watch Exorcist right now and tell me the special effect that you don't think is outstanding.
Right, like when she's coming down the steps and everything, it's just
Yeah, the head spinning, the face, the makeup, the cuts into her body, like all this stuff's been duplicated 100 times by people, and it's never been done better or even close to the quality of the original.
Yeah, even when they're in the room and the air's getting cold and they're breathing out cold air, like suddenly that's just happening. There's just lots of cool little effects that they do in that movie. The white face demon that's blipping for a quarter second does that like 4 times. You don't see that trick. Yeah, you don't see that trick a lot anymore. Like they just did some really cool stuff with that movie. And I'll say that for me, the third installment is genuinely a great movie. I think it's probably one of the most underrated horror movies of all time. I don't think it gets enough credit. That's actually a really good movie.
Yeah, 2 is awful.
I don't. Yeah, 2 is. But 3 is good.
Yeah, three suffers from one simple thing. It's got The Exorcist in the title, and it can't live up to that standard.
Yeah.
But if you look at it as a just look at the movie, you're right. It's a pretty good movie.
Yeah, it's a really good movie.
But this is definitely a franchise ranking buoyed by the original.
Yeah, and it's what's interesting about William Blatty is he had his master's degree in English Lit, and then he went to the Air Force, and he was an officer in psychological warfare, and then he went on later in his life to make one of the scariest movies of all time.
Yeah, and William Friedkin is a renowned director to step in and take Blatty's screenplay, and he's done different types of movies, but he really brought a different sensibility to this that made it a mainstream horror.
Yeah.
Okay, we're in our top 10.
Yes.
Very exciting.
Yes.
It
was tough to whittle it down to this.
Yeah, well, we've covered some great franchises, and we're just getting into the top 10 here.
Yeah.
At number 10 is the Conjuring universe, and this is a series that takes creative license with the real-life files of paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. And this series to date consists of 3 direct Conjuring movies, which to me are the best part of the franchise.
Agreed.
There's also 3 Annabelle spin-offs and 2 Nun spin-offs. And this is another James Wan created, successful, profitable 8-film franchise. And in fact, if you Google search the highest grossing horror franchise of all time, this is what comes up. Some of that's skewed by modern, ticket prices and box office receipts. But the films they're very well acted. They're creepy. They're atmospheric. Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson really shine as the investigative couple. And yeah, I think the first 2 Conjurings are by far the best of the series. But check out the exorcism scene in the opening of Conjuring 3. Very well done.
Yeah, the Conjuring, the first 2 were directed by James Wan, and the second one, when I saw it, I thought this is one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. I love that movie. I think it's the best one out of the entire. Now that's saying something about a series that's this big. Is when the second one is better than the first one. That rarely happens. And I thought that happened. When that happens, it's interesting. But this movie continued to go and make more movies based off the universe, and most of them are good.
Absolutely.
Number 9, we have Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Was released in 1974 with a directorial debut by Tobe Hooper, which is an impossible debut to live up to. He created this realistic, crunchy, slimy film that still holds up to this day. And the second Texas Chainsaw Massacre would come out 12 years later in 1986, also directed by Tobe Hooper. And they've released one every decade for a total of like 9 films. And there's some ups and downs in the franchise, but overall created one of the coolest horror franchises of all time.
Yeah, it's another classic that kind of sat untouched until the sequel-heavy 80s insisted on making a sequel to everything. And none of the sequels or reboots or reimaginings or none of them live up to that gritty, grimy terror of the original. And I still, I mentioned people, what's the scariest movie of all time? I say The Exorcist. What's my favorite horror movie of all time? I say Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's pure horror. And, we talked about this before, how it was at the time it was a midnight drive-in movie because it was just all blood and guts and gore, and it's really not. It just creates that feeling of uneasiness, and I can't believe what I'm seeing without actually hardly any blood in the movie.
Yeah, which is amazing to have that effect on the audience and reviewers, to have a movie so creepy that they feel like it's something it's not, right? Like, or they gives off that effect, which is, a testament to the movie. And Leatherface also being one of the most iconic, villains of all time. Did you like 2003 remake with Jessica Biel when they kind of redid the original?
It was okay.
Just you couldn't do it.
Yeah. It's just nothing's. I feel like you're not going to match it. It was okay.
You're not going to match it, but for a reboot, for like a retelling of it, I thought it was okay. It kind of just uses modern camera and lighting and stuff like that, but like, yeah, you're not going to touch the original.
Yeah. Okay. For number 8, the Halloween series from the great John Carpenter is a franchise built from a small independent film full of great music, great tension, and a cheap William Shatner mask. It's got eight films in the original line, 2 remakes from Rob Zombie, and a new trilogy of reboots that direct sequelize the original and forget everything in between as if it never happened. These 13 films represent almost $1 billion in tickets and put Michael Myers firmly on that Mount Rushmore of horror icons we talked about, and really puts Laurie Strode as a classic final girl turned badass. It's there's an outlier in the film series, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, where John Carpenter had this idea where he was going to do a movie based on the Halloween theme and almost anthologize it with just different topics and go in different directions. When the movie came out, there was huge negative reaction because no Michael Myers, despite the fact the movie is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
It, crowd demands forced the franchise to center around the masked killer, Michael Myers, who was in the original was called The Shape. But it really, really iconic franchise. I actually, when we covered this recently, the 2018 direct sequel is actually very, very good and probably the second best movie in the franchise.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the original and then 2018, I think are the 2 best. And there's some other good ones in the series. Whenever fall time comes around, it's getting ready for like Halloween. You can't help but watch one of these movies. They're just so iconic, and that has one of the best musical scores for a horror movie in the entire genre.
Absolutely.
At number 7, we have Nightmare on Elm Street, originally released in 1984, directed by Wes Craven, starring Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. The series would go on to make a total of 9 movies. The last one was released in 2010. I actually heard that Mike Flanagan said that he would want to direct one of these movies someday. He just couldn't figure out who to get a hold of because I guess the licensing gets sold so much. But it's a great original idea that sparks fear of a slasher film, since it introduces the idea that the person is being chased, but they have nowhere to run. I personally believe the original is one of the greatest horror movies of all time. While the series has its ups and downs like any, it still remains a fun, brutal, and iconic over the years with some great entries.
Yeah, we talked about, Wes Craven and his, the different areas, from the 70s, from Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes to Freddy Krueger to the Scream franchises. He just reinvents horror, and this was the wisecracking burnt child killer.
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about the Mount Rushmore, I think the 3 locks are Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and Freddy Krueger.
Yeah,
and you can debate the 4th.
Yeah,
but it's got more good movies than bad, and what a horrifying premise. You can't go to sleep. You can't escape this living nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of paranormal and ghost and demon horror movies, but this one delves into the nightmare dream universe, which makes it very unique on this list, and it's one of the premises that I love about it.
Excellent choice. Okay, at number 6, we have the Hannibal Lecter series. This Academy Award-winning series is best known for the brilliant portrayal of the cannibalistic serial killer Hannibal Lecter by Anthony Hopkins. And Silence of the Lambs is a fantastic film, deserves all of its accolades, but it's actually not the first time that Hannibal Lecter appeared in a movie. Red Dragon, a book in the series, was adapted in 1986, directed by Michael Mann and with Brian Cox playing the role of Dr. Lecter. And it's actually a very good movie. But then in 1991, Silence of the Lambs came out, and everyone forgot about any Dr. Lecter without Anthony Hopkins. It's one of only 3 movies to sweep the Big Five at the Academy Awards, which is unheard of for any movie, but particularly a horror movie.
Yeah.
And if there's any doubt about it, it is a horror movie.
Yeah, 100%. It's about a killer that it's about a cannibal that's a psychologist that's a killer, right? I mean, like it's just psychologically, when I was young, when I watched it, it horrified me because I was like, this guy gets close to you, he's gonna eat your brains.
Yeah.
And he's able to get close to you, like he is able to get close to people in their minds and like get inside their head. And one thing I love about this movie is that it's actually not the franchise itself, but the Silence of the Lambs, it's like, Jodie Foster's character is trying to like get into his head, and he's just kind of toying with her. And I thought the way they played that out on screen, I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, Silence of the Lambs is clearly the anchor of the series. But as I mentioned, the movie that predated it, Manhunter, was very good. There was also Hannibal Rising, with varying degree of qualities, but they were all. I consider them all like kind of a precursor to the elevated horror of today. They all are well acted, beautifully shot. A budget to support great cinematography. And they also have produced 2 TV series, a single season of Clarice, which was pretty decent, although it was kind of like a procedural FBI that probably didn't fall under horror.
Yeah, they weren't even legally allowed to say Hannibal Lecter in that show.
Yeah, they couldn't even use his name due to different licensing, which is weird.
Yeah.
But it also brought us 3 seasons of Hannibal, a TV show that I think is among the most interesting, brutal, and artistic shows of all time. So the quality that can be mined from this series, and this is a rare case where, to be honest, the books aren't that great. Thomas Harris, I think he's written 7 books, and 5 of them are about Hannibal Lecter. The movies and the series all exceed the book, and it's just a brilliant field to draw from, and it's a great series. And Silence of the Lambs is one of my favorite movies of any kind of all time.
Yeah, I agree. I love Silence of the Lambs, and I think that the show Hannibal, that's actually one of my favorite miniseries of all time. And when I find out people haven't watched them, like, I don't care if you're into horror or not, you got to watch it.
Yeah, amazing imagery and
just brilliant. Number 5, we have It. It was a made-for-TV movie based off the Stephen King novel. The TV movie came out in 1990 with Tim Curry starring as the iconic Pennywise. It was later rebooted as a 2-part theatrical release for 2017 and 2019, and then a miniseries is coming out next year called Derry, set to come out in later 2024. Now, I know that It only has 3 movies, and 2 of them are technically reboots of the original. But I do believe this is one of the greatest franchises of all time due to its influence, quality, and long-standing iconic status. I mean, every clown movie will be forever compared to It. I mean, every Halloween, you're going to see someone dressed up as Pennywise. It's just stood the test of time. And although it doesn't have as many installments as all these other franchises, I still believe it's one of the best of all time.
So you're going with quality over quantity.
For this one, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In 2017 is the highest grossing horror movie of all time. And we covered this movie before, and it deserves it. It's fantastic. It's extremely well done. And I can't wait because the same people who created the 2017 and 2019 films they're the same creators making the Welcome to Derry, I believe is the title. which
Yep.
goes back and looks at historical arrivals of Pennywise. Every 27 years is when he appears. So you can go back to any period in time and kind of do a period drama based on what Pennywise did at that time. And I think that's going to be thrilling.
Brilliant. It's just kind of like how Predator did with Prey. They just kind of put it in a new time. And then when Prey came out, everyone was like, well, now we can do this we can bring it back to samurai time, bring it back,
Right.
you can kind of do anything you want.
Number 4 on our list is the Alien series. The series kicks off with the Ridley Scott seminal sci-fi horror classic in 1979. Still holds up beautifully today. It's creepy, it's claustrophobic, it's tense. It's really groundbreaking in the application of horror in space. And then in 1986, James Cameron sequelized it in a scary but action-packed war between aliens and our team of humans. It's a totally different movie in the same universe, but both are top-notch at what they do. And what follows are effective tales within the franchise, but nothing to match the first two. I think 3 is underrated, particularly if you can get the David Fincher put back together the way he intended version, not what the studio did to it. But then you also have Ridley Scott going back to the original idea with a prequel, Prometheus, which I thought was an excellent precursor to the whole alien story. And it left it somewhat ambiguous at the end, which bothered a lot of people, which I actually liked. I didn't need it tied up with a neat little bow.
Yes, I agree. A lot of people, those movies got a lot of hate, and I was like, I love those movies. But Alien is one of my favorite franchises of all time, and I will watch any Alien movie that comes out. The original is still one of my favorite movies of all time. I've seen it a ton. What I love about it is, it's not just it's a space movie, cool, check that off. It's an alien movie, cool, check that off. It's a horror movie. It's kind of we talked about this. It's kind of like a haunted house, but in space, right? It's a haunted ghost ship kind of thing, right? It has that vibe, that feel to it. It's claustrophobic. They're haunted by something. I think it just checks off so many boxes and does everything so well. And it also brings this whole like ancient lore of where they come from, where the aliens come from, and it kind of has that mystery to it, the ancient, origins of the universe kind of feel to it when you're watching it, and all of these movies to me, I like them all.
It also is one of the great taglines of all time for the original: "In space, no one can hear you scream," which is wonderfully done. And I think for 1979, the production design, and particularly the H.R. Geiger creature design, the biomechanical nature of it was just something no one had really seen at that point, and just really pushes it over the top. I love Prometheus. I think it's an excellent movie. I don't know why it got all the hate.
Michael Fassbender does a great job too.
Yeah, absolutely. Alien Covenant kind of tried to tie Prometheus to the rest of the series. That neat little bow that they didn't provide that people wanted for some reason.
Yeah,
and I think it misses a little bit. I like Prometheus better than Alien Covenant, for example.
I do too. Yeah, I think most people do.
It's got 4 original films, 2 crossover with a Predator.
That's fan service. Everyone wanted that,
Yeah, that's like comic book stuff, but
yeah, it's fan service to me. Yeah.
And then the 2 prequels, and there's also an upcoming new movie directed by Fede Alvarez, and an upcoming TV series. So there's also comic adaptations. There's also video games. Alien as a franchise is so well known and woven into our collective consciousness, and it deserves to be there. It's fantastic.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm really excited for the new one with Fede Alvarez doing that. I can't wait. Number 3, we have Evil Dead, originally released in 1981, directed by Sam Raimi on a low budget that Raimi effectively had to crowdsource. It ended up making $29 million in today's money and going on to have 5 total movies, and one of which was just released this past year, which was really good. It also has a TV series, Ash vs. Evil Dead, that had 30 episodes. And one of the unique things about this franchise to me is that the main character that makes the series so good is that he's a good guy, right? Whereas all of these movies, it's like the Alien, or it has Pennywise, or we have, Freddy and Jason. But Evil Dead, it's Ash. It's the good guy that you're there for, So I think that makes it kind of unique on this list. And in my opinion, it's one of the few franchises, if not the only, that where every movie is solid. I think all 5 of the Evil Dead movies are good.
Yeah, and it's funny, we talked about this back in the spring when we reviewed Evil Dead Rise, and we said, this might be the best franchise of all time because every movie is good.
Yeah.
And if particularly we're talking quality over quantity, and the thing that's amazing to me, they're all good. I love every movie in the franchise, and I love the TV show.
Yeah.
They're all so different. They all bring a diverse approach to what they're doing. There's the straight horror, the horror comedy, the ridiculous action time travel, the hardcore reboot, the relocating to the urban setting. They're all so different, and they all nail what they try to be. And it's just great.
Well, they swung big each time. Like, let's do something different, right? And they just connected and they did it right. Whereas a lot of series, they get formatted, right? Like, all right, it's gonna be this way every time, and we're gonna make this format of a movie. And like Evil Dead, they just kind of, every movie's different, and they just kind of swing,
And that to me is unique. And you look at Hellraiser, as they go on, they just keep trying to tap into what made the original so good.
Yeah.
And even when Sam Raimi makes Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, he's like, all right, I got a bigger budget, but let's do something completely different. Let's go bug shit off the wall crazy with this one. And he succeeds. And I love that ingenuity to just say, let's not stick to the formula that we've tried. What else can we do?
And you have another unique, a unique element to the Evil Dead is you have a great director in Sam Raimi who's friends with the charismatic Bruce Campbell. And so when, they're just a 1-2 punch, and they do it right. You don't see that 1-2 punch with a lot of different series.
Yeah, it definitely was a contender for number 1 overall. It deserves to be way up there in my book.
Agreed.
Okay, number 2. Maybe a bit of a controversial pick here. The Universal Frankenstein series. And it can be hard to exclude some of the classic Universal monsters in a list like this because it kind of devolved into numerous crossovers and increasingly silly attempts to mash them all together just to let's write a story where we can put Frankenstein and the Wolfman in the same movie. Yeah, and that was it seems like that was their directive all the way up to the end with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in 1948 that we've actually covered. So it's kind of hard to put some of the the Mummy or the Draculas in here, but I think Frankenstein stands head and shoulders above those others for a couple different reasons. One, it is the original 1931, James Whale's direction, Jack Pierce's stunning makeup, and Boris Karloff's incredible portrayal of the monster. It's a 5-star movie, right? So you start your series with a 5-star movie, the linchpin of the whole Universal monster. If this movie didn't hit and hit hard, you may not have had the whole rest of the whole thing.
Right.
All right. So you got a 5-star movie to kick it off. And then it's followed up with what is generally considered the greatest monster movie of the entire era, if not of all time, with Bride of Frankenstein. It might be a 6-star movie. Because everybody
Right.
says it's actually even better than the original Frankenstein, and I agree. Even the third entry, Son of Frankenstein, opened to positive reviews, financially successful, and took a cool twist by adding Bela Lugosi in as the Igor character. Now, by the fourth film, Karloff had moved on. He was replaced by Wolfman's Lon Chaney, who stepped into the role. But then the series completely went haywire with mashups where, it became like Scooby-Doo. just Wolfman meeting Frankenstein, meeting Dracula, before they bumble into Abbott and Costello. But I think the series deserves to be here because the first two movies are the absolute pinnacle of the Universal monster movies, and they established, they built the whole thing, and they established a vision of Frankenstein we all see today. Back around Halloween, we were at a little specialty shop in the downtown area, and I bought a cookie for our granddaughter that was Frankenstein's head. She's 5 years old. I brought it back, and we gave it to her, and I said, "Do you know who that is?" She goes, "Yeah, Frankenstein." How does she know? Like, she just started school. I'm sure they don't cover, iconic monsters of the 1930s in kindergarten. Knew exactly who it was without question, and that kind of blew my mind. It's like this is, and if you go, not to dribble on about this too much.
No, go ahead.
If you look at, Hammer's version, Curse of Frankenstein, the makeup and the portrayal with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee is actually closer to Mary Shelley's description. It doesn't have the bolts and it doesn't have the squared off head. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that one. It's a great movie, but when people think of Frankenstein, they think of Karloff, they think of this, and that's it.
I don't think there's a more iconic image. I mean, off the top of my head, that might be the quintessential iconic image where a 5-year-old knows a Frankenstein cookie. I think that's a testament to itself. And I agree. All of these franchises that we're talking about, they all had to it all generated in Hollywood from one important franchise that really spawned it all. That to be able to have that Universal Frankenstein franchise that started off saying, hey, this is something that can be done. You can create a universe with the monster and create all of these films. They kind of proved that it could be done and done really well and done iconically. And it's been almost 100 years. I mean, we're close to, it's like 90 years, and we still look at these movies and you watch them. Like I watched Bride of Frankenstein, I think over the summer, and it's like, that's still a good movie.
Yeah.
like you said, it's still good. It still holds up.
Absolutely does. Yeah. And that's, the first two particularly are 5-star at the top of any list. So I thought the franchise should be included for those reasons and for its historical position in the whole horror franchise industry.
And it's also funny that when they meet Abbott Costello, that's actually a funny movie.
It is.
I like those movies though.
It's what's wrong about that movie though?
What?
Abbott and Costello don't meet Frankenstein. Frankenstein's the doctor. Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein's monster.
The real monster is the audience for believing it. Yeah.
And you'd think they would know better than to mislabel their own creature.
Right. That's funny. Yeah. At number one for the drum roll, we have the George Romero Dead series. Originally released in 1968 as a black and white film, the franchise went on to release a total of 6, as well as 2 remakes. George Romero invented the zombie trope and gave us the rules of the entire genre, while also using that platform for intelligent and interesting social commentary about capitalism, consumerism, classism, and ageism. I personally don't think there's any other franchise that has been more influential in any genre as George Romero's Dead series, bringing forth the modern day zombie.
Completely agree. In none of the series that we've had covered, great films, we've covered a lot of great movies and great franchises. None of them have actually built a genre from scratch. Yep. And nowadays there's a glut of zombies, infected, virus outbreaks, movies. They all stem from the ideas that were hatched by Romero. And we've had this conversation before. In my mind, that Night of the Living Dead is the line of modern horror. There's pre-Night of the Living Dead, and then there's the modern horror world. I think it's that influential, that game-changing, and it defined, as you said, it defined the rules. Here 55 years later, they're still making Walking Dead TV series that the creators acknowledge, none of this would exist without George Romero. In fact, you see one of the showrunners, Greg Nicotero, learned under Tom Savini on George Romero films and actually plays a role in Day of the Dead.
Right.
It's
Right.
just they created something where there was nothing.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. They created something where there was nothing. Yeah, they just somehow summoned their creativity to create this entire genre that, you go to a 7-year, 8-year-old, they'll be like, yeah, you got to shoot a zombie in the head. It's like, do you know where that comes from? Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, this is a rule established by George Romero that, and then we still follow it to this day. And if it's not followed, it's weird, right? It's just like, oh, that's not, that
No,
wouldn't
that's not
happen.
right.
Yeah, that's not right. Yeah, it's like,
not
but
how
it
it
was
works.
just a series created by George Romero, but it's that impactful, and those movies are all that good.
I've always believed that Romero was a genius. I love that he always had depth and messaging within his films. It's something his copiers, the millions and millions of copies trying to, take his ideas and make something from them. They all missed. They all missed the depth and the message he always brought to his films. They're always more than what they appeared on the surface. And I think Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead is probably the greatest zombie movie ever made. Day of the Dead, all three of those are top notch that define the rules for generations that followed.
Did you like the remake 2004 of Dawn of the Dead, or do you like the original?
Ooh, I like the original. I liked the remake.
But the original, just
Yeah, I'm on the slow zombie team. Wasn't a fan of the. If you want to make fast zombies, then you gotta make them viral infected, and then it makes sense.
Yeah.
But unless you're recently deceased, the rotting people climbing out of graves, they're not going to be fast.
Right.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
Land of the Dead was a very well reviewed Hollywood dip into Romero's world. And Diary of the Dead was a found angle footage, which I actually really, really liked that movie. I know it wasn't as well received as the others, and it's not a classic like the others. But everyone was making a found footage movie. Go back, and an amateur film crew that's recording when the zombie outbreak first breaks out in the world. What a perfect way to throw a found footage in there.
Yeah.
I thought the weakest was Survival of the Dead, which was the final before George passed away. And it's funny, it's the worst, in my opinion. It's the worst reviewed. It was the worst financial success. It's actually his wife Suzanne's favorite. Yeah, she loves it.
I wonder if there's like a certain sentiment to it for her,
And there's actually a new film on the way, Twilight of the Dead, which was based on notes Romero had left before he passed away. Some of these go all the way back to what Day of the Dead was and what he envisioned for the end of the trilogy. His vision was too grand in scope for the budget he was going to be working with. So maybe with modern technology and people picking up his notes for Twilight of the Dead, maybe we'll get a real Romero-worthy send-off here.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Like, projects like that sometimes take time because they have to be put in the right hands and people have to agree on things. And sometimes you hear rumors of movies that are going to be made. And it just takes a decade.
Yeah.
So we'll see. But
and then they fall by the wayside, and
then they fall by the
happen,
wayside. Yeah, there was a famous Superman movie that happened that was supposed to have Nick Cage, and they spent like $100 million putting it together, and it just never saw the light of day.
Yeah,
yeah.
I hope it happens, and I hope it's a worthy tribute. And I love your selection. I've always been a big fan. Those are some of my favorite movies. And like you said, none of these others, just built a different world. They took monsters that existed, and Romero made his own monsters.
Yeah, made his own rules and made his own universe. And to this day, we still love it.
And we do. Awesome. Well, that's good stuff. Well, that is our list of the top 20 horror franchises of all time. Again, agree, disagree, think we're full of it. We'd love to hear your feedback. That's the kind of point of all this, is to
yell at me for putting it in the top 10.
That's not a series.
Yeah, it's not franchise.
But yeah, that's the fun of the whole thing. And really enjoyed doing it. And again, we're celebrating. Last week we put up our 50th episode. So we figured it's a good time to have some fun and celebrate.
Yeah.
We are the Weekly Horoscope. That's our episode for this week. I'm Jerry. That's Matt, and we'll be back next week, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.